When estate lawyer Sarah Chen received the anonymous letter claiming the Wellington family's billion-dollar inheritance belonged to someone else entirely, she thought it was just another desperate attempt at fraud. But the DNA evidence hidden in a safety deposit box that hadn't been opened for 30 years would shatter everything the prestigious family believed about their legacy and put Sarah's life in dangerous hands of those who would kill to keep the truth buried. Sarah Chen had always prided herself on being unshakable. 20 years of handling estate disputes for Manhattan's elite had taught her that money brought out the worst in people, but nothing had prepared her for the Wellington case. The family's patriarch, Harrison Wellington, had built a media empire worth $3 billion before his death 6 months ago, and now his will was being contested by someone claiming to be his rightful heir. The morning everything changed began like any other. Sarah arrived at her Park Avenue office at 7:30, coffee in hand, ready to tackle another day of legal battles and family drama. Her assistant, Marcus, was already at his desk, sorting through the morning mail with practiced efficiency. "Anything interesting today?" Sarah asked, settling into a leather chair that overlooked Central Park. Marcus handed her a stack of documents and letters. The usual estate inquiries, some new client referrals, and this. He held up a manila envelope with no return address. "Hand-delivered this morning." The security guard said a woman in sunglasses dropped it off and left immediately. Sarah examined the envelope. Her name was written in careful block letters, nothing more. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper with a message that made her blood run cold. The Wellington fortune doesn't belong to them. Check safety deposit box 847 at First National Bank. The key is taped under the bench in Central Park, southeast corner of the reservoir. You have 48 hours before I go to the media. A friend who knows the truth. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as another fraudulent claim. The Wellington estate had already attracted dozens of people claiming to be long-lost relatives or forgotten business partners. But something about the specific details, the safety deposit box number, the exact location in Central Park, gave her pause. Sarah spent the morning researching the Wellington family history more thoroughly than she had before. Harrison Wellington had come from modest beginnings in Ohio, worked his way through Columbia University, and built his empire from nothing. He had married his college sweetheart, Margaret, and they had 2 children, Victoria, now 45, and running the company's television division, and Thomas, 42, and heading the newspaper operations. It was a classic American success story, documented thoroughly in business magazines and society pages for decades. But as Sarah dug deeper, she noticed gaps. Harrison's early years were sparsely documented. His parents had died when he was young, and he had no siblings or extended family that anyone knew about. For someone who later courted publicity for his business ventures, his personal history before age 25 was remarkably thin. During her lunch break, Sarah found herself walking toward Central Park despite her better judgment. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was foolish, potentially dangerous, and almost certainly a waste of time. But her investigative instincts, honed by years of uncovering family secrets and hidden assets, wouldn't let her ignore the possibility that this anonymous tip might be legitimate. The southeast corner of the reservoir was busy with joggers and tourists, but Sarah quickly located the bench mentioned in the letter. She sat down casually, pretending to check her phone while scanning the area for anyone who might be watching her. After several minutes, she allowed her hand to drift under the bench, feeling along the weathered wood until her fingers encountered something unexpected. A small piece of tape holding what felt like a key. Her heart pounding, Sarah palmed the key and walked briskly back to her office. The small silver key looked genuine, with 847 inches etched into the metal and the First National Bank logo clearly visible. This wasn't some elaborate fake. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to set up this elaborate breadcrumb trail. Sarah called First National Bank and confirmed that safety deposit box 847 existed and was currently being rented by someone using the name H. Williams. The rental had been paid in advance for 30 years, with the last payment made 3 decades ago. The bank representative explained that the box hadn't been accessed since it was first rented, and they had been trying to locate the renter to discuss the expired rental agreement. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called Victoria Wellington and arranged a meeting for the following morning. Victoria was elegant and composed, much like her late father, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. They met in Sarah's conference room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. "Ms. Chen, I hope you're not calling me here because of another frivolous claim against my father's estate," Victoria said, settling into the chair across from Sarah with practiced grace. We've already dealt with 17 people claiming to be secret relatives or business partners. Sarah chose her words carefully. I've received some information that suggests there may be legitimate questions about your father's early life that could impact the estate. I want to investigate thoroughly before deciding whether to pursue it further. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. My father's life was an open book. He came from nothing, built an empire through hard work and intelligence, and left everything to his family as he should have.
What exactly are you suggesting?
I'm not suggesting anything yet, Sarah replied. But I've learned that there's a safety deposit box that may contain information relevant to your father's estate. I think we should examine its contents together, in the presence of witnesses, to ensure transparency. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. You think someone has proof that my father's fortune doesn't belong to us? I think someone believes they do, Sarah said carefully. Whether that belief has any basis in reality remains to be seen. The next morning, Sarah, Victoria, and the bank manager stood in the vault of First National Bank, looking at safety deposit box 847. The bank manager, a nervous man named Peterson, explained that they would need to drill the lock since they didn't have authorization from the renter. But Sarah produced the key she had found in Central Park. The key turned smoothly, and the box slid open to reveal a collection of documents that would shatter the Wellington family's understanding of their history. On top was a birth certificate for Harrison Webster, born in 1945 in Cleveland, Ohio, not Harrison Wellington as everyone believed. Beneath that were adoption papers showing that Harrison Webster had been adopted at age 6 by a family named Wellington after his parents died in a car accident. But the most shocking discovery was a handwritten letter dated 30 years ago, signed by Harrison himself. In it, he confessed that his entire fortune had been built on stolen intellectual property. His first major business success, a revolutionary printing process that made his newspapers more efficient and profitable than his competitors, had actually been invented by his biological brother, David Webster, who had died in Vietnam before he could patent his invention. According to the letter, Harrison had found his brother's detailed plans and notes among his possessions after David's death. Instead of honoring his brother's memory or sharing the invention with David's young son, Harrison had used the stolen technology to launch his own career. The guilt had haunted him for decades. But by the time he wanted to make amends, he was too deeply invested in the lie to come clean publicly. Victoria stared at the documents in shock, her usual composure completely shattered. "This can't be real," she whispered. "My father would never. He was the most honest man I knew. But there was more." At the bottom of the box was a thick folder containing proof that David Webster had indeed left behind a son, Michael Webster, who would now be 57 years old and was legally entitled to a significant portion of the Wellington fortune. The folder included Michael's birth certificate, school records, and most damning of all, a copy of David's original patent application for the printing process, dated 6 months before Harrison had filed his own claim for the same technology. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about money, it was about justice for a man who had been cheated out of his rightful inheritance for decades, and about a family who was about to learn that their entire legacy was built on a lie. As they left the bank, Victoria was unusually quiet. Finally, she turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "What happens now?"
"Now we find Michael Webster," Sarah said quietly.
"And we figure out how to make this right." But neither woman realized they were being watched from across the street by someone who had been waiting 30 years for this moment, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to ensure the truth finally came to light, no matter who got hurt in the process. The search for Michael Webster proved more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. The man had seemingly vanished into thin air after his father's death in Vietnam, with no current address, employment records, or even a valid social security number that could be traced to him. It was as if he had deliberately erased himself from public records. Sarah hired a private investigator named Jake Morrison, a former FBI agent who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Jake was a weathered man in his 60s, with silver hair and penetrating grey eyes that missed nothing. His office was cluttered with case files and old coffee cups, but his reputation for results was legendary among New York's legal community.
"This is interesting," Jake said, after reviewing the Webster file.
"Your missing heir has been very careful about covering his tracks. But everyone leaves traces, even the ghosts. Give me a week." While Jake worked his contacts, Sarah found herself drawn deeper into the mystery of Harrison Wellington's true identity. She spent hours in the Columbia University archives, piecing together Harrison's college years and trying to understand how a grief-stricken young man had transformed himself so completely. What she discovered painted a picture of a brilliant but desperate person who had made a terrible choice and spent the rest of his life trying to live with the consequences. Harrison's college roommate, Professor Emeritus Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, was now 83 and living in a retirement community in Westchester. When Sarah visited him, she found a sharp-minded man whose memory of those early days was crystal clear. Harry was never the same after his brother died, Professor Chen told her, settling into his favorite armchair with a cup of tea. He had been supporting himself and putting money aside to help David start his own business when David came back from the war. When the news came that David had been killed in action, Harry just broke. He stopped eating, stopped going to classes, barely spoke to anyone for months. Sarah leaned forward. What changed? How did he recover? The old professor's expression grew troubled. That's the strange thing. One day, maybe 4 months after he got the news about David, Harry suddenly snapped out of his depression. He became focused, driven, almost manic. He started talking about big plans, revolutionary ideas that would change the publishing industry. But when I asked him where these ideas came from, he would just say that David had given him everything he needed. Did you ever suspect that something was wrong? Professor Chen was quiet for a long moment. I wondered. Harry had always been smart, but he wasn't an inventor or an engineer like his brother. David was the technical genius in the family. But Harry was so convinced, so passionate about his plans, that I thought maybe grief had unlocked some hidden potential in him. Sarah left the retirement community with a clearer picture of how Harrison's transformation had occurred. But she was also troubled by a growing realization. If Harrison had been living with this guilt for decades, there might be other people who knew the truth. People who might be willing to kill to keep it hidden. Her concerns proved justified when Jake called her 3 days later with urgent news. I found your missing heir, he said, his voice tense. But we have a problem. Someone else has been looking for Michael Webster, and they found him first. Sarah met Jake at a small diner in Queens, far from her usual Manhattan haunts. Jake looked tired and worried, which was unusual for a man who had faced down international criminals and corporate conspiracies without breaking a sweat. Michael Webster has been living under the name Mike Warren for the past 30 years, Jake explained, sliding a thick file across the table. He's a high school teacher in Portland, Oregon, married with 2 kids, keeps a low profile, pays his taxes, coaches Little League Baseball. A completely normal life. What's the problem then? Jake's expression darkened. 2 weeks ago, someone broke into his house while his family was on vacation. Nothing was stolen, but the place was thoroughly searched. Professional job, they knew exactly what they were looking for. Then yesterday, Mike received a phone call warning him to stop digging into the past or face consequences. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone knows we're investigating. They're trying to scare him off. It gets worse, Jake continued. I did some digging into who might have access to the kind of information we've uncovered. The safety deposit box, the anonymous letter you received. This feels like an inside job. Someone with access to Harrison Wellington's private papers and personal history has been planning this for a long time. Sarah thought about the people who would have known Harrison's secrets. His wife, Margaret, had died 5 years earlier, but his children, Victoria and Thomas, both had access to their father's private study and personal documents. His longtime personal assistant, Elena Rodriguez, had worked for the family for 25 years and knew more about Harrison's business than anyone except Harrison himself. I need to talk to Michael Webster, Sarah decided. If someone is threatening him, he deserves to know why. Jake nodded but looked concerned. Be careful, Sarah. Whoever is behind this has already demonstrated they're willing to use intimidation tactics. If they're desperate enough, they might escalate to violence. That evening, Sarah called the number Jake had provided for Michael Webster. A cautious voice answered on the 3rd ring. Mr. Webster? This is Sarah Chen, an estate attorney in New York. I believe I have some information that concerns you and your family's history. There was a long pause. I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Mike Warren. Mr. Webster, I know about your father David and his invention. I know about Harrison Wellington and what he took from your family. And I know that someone has been threatening you to keep quiet about it. Another pause, then a quiet sigh. How did you find me? The same way the people threatening you found you. But unlike them, I'm calling because I want to help you claim what rightfully belongs to you. Lady, I don't want anything from those people. I've spent 30 years building a life where no one knows who I am or where I came from. I'm not about to throw that away for money." Sarah could hear the fear and exhaustion in his voice. "Mr. Al? Webster, your father's invention is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. More importantly, you have children who deserve to know their family's true history. Don't you think they have a right to choose whether to pursue what belongs to them?" "My kids are happy and safe," Michael said firmly. "I won't put them in danger for money, no matter how much it is. What if I could guarantee their safety? What if I could help you expose the truth in a way that protects your family while still getting justice for your father?" Michael was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke again. "There's something you need to know. I've known about Harrison Wellington and what he stole from my father for 15 years. I hired investigators, gathered evidence, even consulted with lawyers about pursuing a case. But every time I got close to taking action, something would happen. My wife would lose a job, or one of my kids would have an accident, or my house would be broken into. I finally realized that someone was watching me, making sure I never got too close to the truth." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Who? Who's been watching you?" "I never found out for sure, but I have suspicions. Harrison Wellington was a powerful man with a lot to lose if this secret came out. He would have done whatever it took to protect his family's reputation and fortune. And now that he's dead, someone is still protecting that secret. Mr. Webster, I think the person who's been threatening you is the same person who led me to discover the truth about your father. Someone wants this story to come out, but they want to control how and when it happens." Why would someone do that? Sarah was beginning to understand the elaborate game that had been set in motion. Because they want to destroy the Wellington family completely. "This isn't about justice for your father, it's about revenge." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You're getting close to the truth, Ms. Chen. Be very careful who you trust. Not everyone who claims to want justice actually has pure motives. Check your email for a gift that will help you understand what you're really dealing with." Sarah's laptop chimed with a new email containing a single video file. When she opened it, she found herself watching security footage from Harrison Wellington's private study, dated just 2 weeks before his death. In the video, Harrison was arguing with someone whose face was just out of frame, but whose voice was clearly audible. "You can't keep running from this forever, Harry. That man's son deserves to know the truth about what you did to his father." Harrison's response was desperate, pleading, "If this comes out, it will destroy everything. My children, my grandchildren, they'll lose everything they've worked for. And for what? Nothing will bring David back. But it might save Michael Webster from a life of wondering why his father's sacrifice meant nothing." The video ended abruptly, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. But one thing was now clear. Someone close to Harrison Wellington had been pressuring him to confess his secret before he died. Someone who knew the full truth and had been planning this revelation for months, possibly years. The question was whether this person was a friend seeking justice or an enemy seeking destruction. And Sarah was beginning to suspect that the answer might determine whether anyone involved in this case survived to see its conclusion. The video footage haunted Sarah's dreams that night. She kept replaying the conversation between Harrison and the unknown visitor, analyzing every word and inflection for clues about the mysterious person's identity. By morning, she had made a decision that would either solve the case or put her life in serious danger. Sarah called Victoria Wellington and requested an urgent meeting, but this time she wanted to include Thomas Wellington as well. She also asked Victoria to bring Elena Rodriguez, Harrison's longtime personal assistant. If someone within the Wellington inner circle was orchestrating this revelation, Sarah needed to observe their reactions when confronted with the evidence. The meeting was set for 11 o'clock in the Wellington Media Building's executive conference room, a glass-walled space on the 40th floor that offered panoramic views of Manhattan. Sarah arrived early and set up her laptop and documents, including printed copies of everything she had discovered in the safety deposit box. Victoria arrived first, looking more stressed than Sarah had ever seen her. Her usually perfect makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her normally confident demeanor seemed strained. "Miss Chen, I hope you have some answers for us. The past few days have been a nightmare." Thomas Wellington followed minutes later, and Sarah immediately noticed the family resemblance. He had the same sharp blue eyes as his sister, but where Victoria radiated control and composure, Thomas seemed barely contained energy and restless intelligence. He was taller than Sarah had expected, with graying hair at his temples that made him look distinguished despite being younger than his sister. "Victoria tells me you found some disturbing information about our father," Thomas said without preamble. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with."
Elena Rodriguez was the last to arrive, and Sarah studied her carefully.
Elena was a small woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that spoke of decades spent managing other people's lives and secrets. She had worked for Harrison since she was 28 years old, which meant she knew him better than almost anyone else in the world. "Elena, thank you for coming," Sarah said. "I know this must be difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about Mr. Krellerman, Wellington's final months." Elena nodded nervously. "Of course. Mr. Wellington was like family to me. I want to help however I can." Sarah began by showing them the documents from the safety deposit box, watching their faces carefully as she explained about Harrison's true identity and the stolen invention that had launched his empire. Victoria and Thomas were clearly shocked, but Elena's reaction was different. She looked sad but not surprised.
Elena, did you know about any of this? Sarah asked gently.
Elena glanced nervously at Victoria and Thomas before answering. "I suspected something." In his final months, Mr. Wellington became very troubled. He would spend hours in his study, going through old papers and making phone calls to people he hadn't spoken to in years. He started talking about making amends for past mistakes. Thomas leaned forward intently. What kind of amends? Did he mention David Webster specifically? Not by name, but he talked about someone he had wronged years ago, someone whose son deserved better. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "He asked me to help him locate someone, but he wouldn't tell me who or why." Sarah felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. "Elena, did anyone visit Mr. Shower Wellington in private during those final months? Someone who might have been pressuring him to confess his secrets?" Elena hesitated, and Sarah could see she was struggling with divided loyalties. Finally, she nodded slowly. "There was someone. A woman who came to see him several times. She never gave me her name. And Mr. Wellington always met with her alone. But I could hear them arguing sometimes." Victoria and Thomas exchanged glances. "What did this woman look like?" Victoria asked. "Older, maybe in her 70s. Well-dressed, with silver hair and very intense eyes. She spoke with a slight accent. Eastern European, I think. And she seemed to know a lot about Mr. Michael Wellington's past." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. The description matched someone she had seen in the old photographs from Harrison's college days, David Webster's girlfriend, Anna Kozlov, who had disappeared after David's death in Vietnam. If Anna was still alive and had somehow learned the truth about Harrison's theft, she would have powerful motivation for revenge. "Elena, I need you to think very carefully. Did you ever hear this woman mention the name Anna or David?"
Elena's eyes widened. "Yes."
"I remember now. During one of their arguments, Mr. Wellington said something like, 'Anna, you can't undo the past.' I thought it was strange because he usually called people by their title or last name." Sarah showed them the video footage on her laptop, and the recognition on Elena's face was immediate. "That's her," Elena said firmly. "That's the woman who kept visiting Mr. Bass Wellington." Victoria was staring at the screen in shock. "You're telling us that some woman from our father's past has been orchestrating this entire situation? That she's the one who sent you the anonymous letter and led you to the safety deposit box?" "I think Anna Kozlov has been planning this revelation for years," Sarah explained. "She loved David Webster, and when she learned what Harrison had done to him, she decided to get revenge. But she waited until Harrison was dying to make her move, because she wanted him to suffer with the guilt before the truth came out." Thomas was pacing now, his restless energy unable to be contained in the small space. "But why involve Michael Webster? Why not just go to the media herself?" "Because she wants maximum impact," Sarah realized. "If Michael Webster comes forward as the rightful heir, it creates a legal battle that will destroy the Wellington name completely. The media will eat this story alive. The self-made billionaire who built his empire on stolen ideas from his dead brother. It's perfect revenge." "What do we do now?" Victoria asked quietly. Her usual commanding presence had completely evaporated, replaced by exhaustion and fear. Sarah had been thinking about this question all morning. "We have several options. We can try to fight this quietly, hope that Michael Webster continues to stay hidden, and that Anna Kozlov doesn't go public. We can try to discredit the evidence somehow. Or, Thomas prompted, or we can get ahead of the story. We can reach out to Michael Webster ourselves, offer him a fair settlement, and control how this information becomes public. We take responsibility for Harrison's actions and try to make amends." Victoria laughed bitterly. "You want us to voluntarily give away hundreds of millions of dollars to a man we've never met based on the word of some vengeful old woman. I want you to consider what's best for your family in the long run," Sarah said firmly. If this story breaks on Anna Kozlov's terms, the Wellington name will be destroyed forever. Your children and grandchildren will grow up knowing that their fortune came from theft and lies.
If you control the narrative, you can frame this as a story of redemption. The children of Harrison Wellington making amends for their father's mistakes. Thomas stopped pacing and stared out the window at the city below. How do we know this Anna woman won't demand more? How do we know she won't keep coming after us even if we pay off Michael Webster? Sarah had been wondering the same thing. I think we need to arrange a meeting with Anna Kozlov. We need to understand what she really wants and whether there's a way to satisfy her desire for justice without destroying everyone involved. Elena spoke up quietly. I may be able to help with that. Before Mr. Wellington died, he gave me a sealed envelope and told me to deliver it to Anna if anything happened to him. I still have it. The room fell silent as the implications of Elena's revelation sank in. Harrison Wellington had anticipated this moment and left behind one final message for the woman who had been hunting him. Whatever was in that envelope might hold the key to resolving this situation, or it might make everything infinitely worse. Elena, where is the envelope now? Sarah asked carefully. In the safe, in Mr. Wellington's study. I was waiting for the right time to try to deliver it, but I didn't know how to find her. Sarah looked around the table at the three faces staring back at her. Victoria and Thomas Wellington, who had just learned that their entire legacy was built on a lie. Elena Rodriguez, who had kept her employer's secrets for decades and was now being asked to help unravel them. And herself, an estate attorney who had stumbled into a 30-year-old conspiracy that was about to explode into the public eye. I think it's time we found out what Harrison Wellington's final message says, Sarah said finally. Because I have a feeling that our next move depends entirely on what he wanted Anna Kozlov to know. As they prepared to leave for the Wellington estate to retrieve the mysterious envelope, Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number.
You're learning quickly, Miss Chen.
But be careful not to trust the wrong people. Not everyone in that room wants the same outcome you do. Check the parking garage before you leave the building. Sarah's blood went cold as she realized that someone had been watching their meeting. Someone who knew exactly where they were and what they were discussing. Someone who was still pulling the strings in this elaborate game of revenge and justice. The question was whether this mysterious observer was trying to help her or warning her that she was walking into a trap. Sarah excused herself to use the restroom and instead took the elevator down to the parking garage, her heart pounding with each floor she descended. The garage was dimly lit and mostly empty, with only a few scattered cars in the vast concrete space. She walked slowly between the rows of vehicles, scanning for anything unusual. Near the back corner, she found what the anonymous tipster wanted her to see. A black sedan, with tinted windows parked in a spot that gave its occupants a clear view of all the elevator exits. The car appeared empty, but Sarah noticed that the engine was running and steam was rising from the exhaust pipe in the cold winter air. As she watched from behind a concrete pillar, the elevator doors opened and Thomas Wellington emerged alone. Instead of walking to his own car, he approached the black sedan. The driver's window rolled down, and Sarah could see him having an intense conversation with someone inside, though she was too far away to hear what they were saying. After several minutes, Thomas handed something to the person in the car, an envelope or document of some kind. The conversation continued for a few more minutes before Thomas walked away and the sedan pulled out of the garage at high speed. Sarah felt sick as the implications hit her. Thomas Wellington was working with someone outside the family, someone who had been monitoring their investigation. The anonymous messages she had been receiving weren't from Anna Kozlov or some concerned whistleblower. They were coming from Thomas himself or his associates. She quickly made her way back to the conference room, where Victoria and Elena were waiting. Sarah struggled to maintain her composure as she processed what she had witnessed. Thomas returned a few minutes later, acting as if nothing had happened. Are we ready to go retrieve that envelope? Thomas asked, checking his watch. I'd like to resolve this situation as quickly as possible. Sarah made a split-second decision. Actually, I think it would be better if I went alone with Elena. Too many people might make Anna Kozlov suspicious if she's watching the house. Victoria nodded. That makes sense. Thomas and I can work on preparing our legal team for whatever we find in that envelope. Thomas's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance, but he quickly recovered. Of course. Call us as soon as you know what Harrison's message says. An hour later, Sarah and Elena stood in Harrison Wellington's private study, a wood-paneled room lined with first-edition books and family photographs that now felt like elaborate lies. The safe was hidden behind a portrait of Harrison in his younger days, before guilt and success had lined his face with secrets.
Elena's hands shook slightly as she opened the combination lock. "I feel like I'm betraying him by doing this," she said quietly. "He trusted me with so many secrets over the years. Elena, I think Harrison would want you to do whatever it takes to protect his family now," Sarah said gently, "even if that means revealing his mistakes." The safe contained several documents in a small stack of sealed envelopes. Eleanor found the one labeled, "For Anna," in Harrison's careful handwriting. The envelope was thick and appeared to contain more than just a letter. "Should we open it?" Elena asked uncertainly. Sarah weighed the ethics of reading a private message against the need to understand what they were dealing with. "I think we need to know what Harrison wanted to tell Anna before we try to find her. Our response strategy depends on understanding his intentions." Elena carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten letter along with several documents. As Sarah read Harrison's words, she felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The letter was a confession, but it was also an attempt at redemption. "My dearest Anna," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally decided to pursue the justice that David deserved all those years ago. I have lived with the guilt of what I did every day since David's death, and I know that nothing I can say or do now will bring him back or undo the pain I caused his son." The letter went on to detail exactly what Harrison had stolen from David and how he had used the invention to build his fortune. But more importantly, it revealed that Harrison had been quietly setting aside money for years, creating a secret fund that was intended for Michael Webster. "I have established a trust fund containing $200 million, Harrison had written. "The documents for this trust are enclosed with this letter. Michael Webster is the sole beneficiary. I pray that this money, along with the royalties from David's patent that I have been holding in escrow, will begin to make amends for what I took from him."
Sarah looked at the additional documents and realized that Harrison had been planning to make this right for years.
The trust fund was legitimate and fully funded. There were also copies of David's original patent applications and a detailed confession that would serve as legal proof of Michael Webster's rightful claim to a portion of the Wellington fortune. "Elena, did you know about any of this?" Sarah asked. Elena shook her head in amazement. "He never said anything to me about a secret trust fund, but it explains some of the financial transactions I handled for him over the years. I thought he was just diversifying his investments." Sarah's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. "You found Harrison's confession. Good. But don't assume Thomas will let you deliver it to Anna or Michael Webster. He's been working to suppress this information for months. Check the cars outside. You're about to have company." Sarah rushed to the window and saw 3 black sedans pulling up the circular driveway of the Wellington estate. Her heart sank as she recognized one of the vehicles as the sedan she had seen Thomas talking to in the parking garage. "Eleanor, we need to leave. Now," Sarah said urgently. "Take the envelope and all the documents from the safe. We're going to have visitors who don't want us to succeed." "What's happening? Who's coming?" "Thomas has been working with someone to keep this secret buried. They know we have Harrison's confession, and they're not going to let us walk out of here with it." Elena quickly gathered all the documents while Sarah tried to think of an escape route. The front entrance was blocked by the approaching cars, but she remembered seeing a side door that led to the gardens. They made their way through the kitchen and out the side door just as they heard the front door opening and multiple voices entering the house. Sarah and Elena crept through the landscape gardens toward Elena's car, which was parked in the staff area behind the house. As they reached the car, Sarah's phone rang. It was Thomas. "Sarah, where are you?" "We came to the house to help you with the envelope, but you're not in the study." Sarah made another split-second decision.
"Thomas, I think we should meet somewhere neutral to discuss what we found."
"There are some things in Harrison's letter that the whole family needs to hear together.
What kind of things?
Things that change everything about how we handle this situation. Can you meet us at my office in an hour?" There was a pause before Thomas responded. "Of course. We'll be there." As Elena drove away from the estate, Sarah called Jake Morrison, her private investigator. "Jake, I need you to arrange protection for Michael Webster and his family immediately. And I need you to find Anna Kozlov. The situation has changed dramatically, and I think everyone's life is now in danger." "What's changed?" Harrison Wellington wasn't just a man who made a mistake 30 years ago. He was a man who spent 30 years trying to make amends for that mistake, and there are people who are willing to kill to prevent that redemption from happening. Sarah looked at the envelope containing Harrison's confession and trust fund documents. In her hands, she held the power to destroy the Wellington family, or to give them a chance at redemption. But first, she had to survive long enough to make that choice. The anonymous messages had stopped coming, which meant that either her mysterious ally had been discovered, or they no longer needed to guide her actions. Either way, Sarah was now on her own in a game where the stakes had just become life and death. As they drove back toward Manhattan, Sarah made a decision that would determine the outcome of this 30-year-old conspiracy. Instead of going to her office where Thomas was expecting to meet them, she was going to find Anna Kozlov herself. It was time to end this game on her own terms, not on the terms of people who had already proven they were willing to use violence to protect their secrets. The final confrontation was coming, and Sarah intended to make sure that justice, not revenge or greed, would determine who walked away from this situation with their lives and dignity intact. Finding Anna Kozlov proved easier than Sarah had expected. Elena remembered that Harrison had kept an old address book in his desk, one that contained contacts from his college years that he had never transferred to his modern systems. Anna was listed under her maiden name, with an address in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, that was nearly 30 years old. When Sarah and Elena arrived at the address, they found a small apartment building that housed mostly elderly Eastern European immigrants. The current tenant of Anna's old apartment was a young Russian family who had never heard of Anna Kozlov. But the building superintendent, an elderly man named Dmitry, remembered her well. Anna lived here for 20 years after she came from the old country, Dmitry told them in heavily accented English. Good woman, very sad about her boyfriend who died in the war. She moved out maybe 10 years ago when her health got bad. Lives in assisted living now. Dmitry gave them the address of Sunset Manor, a modest assisted living facility in Queens. As they drove through the late afternoon traffic, Sarah tried to prepare herself for meeting the woman who had orchestrated this elaborate revelation. What kind of person spent decades planning revenge for a lost love? Sunset Manor was a clean but unremarkable building that housed about 60 elderly residents. The receptionist, a kind woman named Patricia, confirmed that Anna Kozlov was indeed a resident, but explained that she rarely had visitors. Mrs. Kozlov keeps to herself mostly, Patricia said. She has some health issues that make it difficult for her to get around, but her mind is sharp as a tack. She spends most of her time reading and writing letters. Sarah asked to speak with Anna privately, and Patricia led them to a small visiting room with comfortable chairs and large windows overlooking a modest garden. After several minutes, a nurse wheeled in an elderly woman who matched Elena's description perfectly. Silver hair, intense eyes, and an aura of quiet dignity despite her obvious physical frailness. Anna Kozlov studied Sarah and Elena with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear, with only the slightest trace of an accent. You must be Ms. Chen, the attorney who's been investigating Harrison's secrets, Anna said without preamble. And you must be Elena, his faithful assistant. I have been expecting you. Sarah was taken aback by Anna's directness. Mrs. Kozlov, I have some questions about your relationship with Harrison Wellington and what you know about David Webster's death. Anna smiled sadly. I know everything, Ms. Chen. I have known for 30 years exactly what Harrison did to David's memory and to David's son. The question is whether you are here to help me get justice or to convince me to keep quiet.
Elena leaned forward earnestly. Mrs.
Kozlov, before he died, Mr. Wellington left you a letter. He wanted you to know that he had been trying to make amends. Anna's expression softened slightly at the mention of the letter. May I see it? Sarah handed over the envelope, and Anna read Harrison's confession with tears streaming down her cheeks. When she finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, holding the documents that proved Harrison had established a trust fund for Michael Webster. 30 years, Anna whispered finally. I have spent 30 years hating him, planning ways to destroy everything he built. And all this time, he was trying to find a way to make things right. Mrs. Kozlov, Sarah said gently, what exactly happened between you and Harrison after David's death? How did you learn what he had done? Anna's story unfolded slowly, revealing a tale of love, loss, and patient determination that was both heartbreaking and frightening.
After David's death in Vietnam, Anna had been devastated.
She and David had been planning to marry when he returned from the war, and his death had left her feeling lost and purposeless. I came to America in 1975, hoping to start a new life, Anna explained. I had David's letters from Vietnam, and in them he wrote about his invention and how it would change the printing industry. He was so excited about coming home and starting his own business. Anna had tried to contact Harrison to learn more about David's plans, but Harrison had claimed ignorance about any invention.
It was only years later, when she saw news coverage of Harrison's breakthrough printing technology, that she began to suspect the truth. I spent years collecting evidence, talking to people who had known David, gathering his letters and notes. By the late 1980s, I had proof that Harrison had stolen David's invention. But I was just an immigrant woman with limited resources. Who would believe me against a powerful businessman? Instead of going public immediately, Anna had decided to wait and plan. She had tracked Michael Webster's movements over the years, watching him struggle financially while Harrison's empire grew larger. She had gathered evidence not just of the original theft, but of Harrison's ongoing success built on David's stolen ideas. I wanted Harrison to know that I knew, Anna said. I wanted him to live with the fear that someday the truth would come out. So I began visiting him, reminding him of what he had done, making sure he never forgot David's sacrifice. Sarah realized that Anna's campaign of psychological pressure had been incredibly sophisticated. She had waited until Harrison was old and successful, when he had the most to lose, before revealing that she knew his secret. She had orchestrated the anonymous tips that led Sarah to discover the evidence, timing everything perfectly to maximize the impact. But Mrs. Kozlov, Elena said, why didn't you just contact Michael Webster directly? Why involve lawyers and create such an elaborate plan? Anna's expression hardened slightly. Because I learned that Harrison's family was actively working to suppress any investigation into his past. Thomas Wellington has known about his father's secret for years. He hired private investigators to monitor Michael Webster, to make sure he never learned the truth about his father's invention. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. Thomas has been trying to prevent this revelation from the beginning. He's the one who's been threatening Michael Webster. Thomas has his father's ruthlessness, but none of his guilt, Anna confirmed. When I began pressuring Harrison to confess, Thomas discovered what I was doing. He has been trying to find a way to silence me permanently. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone rang. It was Thomas Wellington, and his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Sarah, I know where you are and who you're with. You need to understand that you're playing with forces beyond your control. Anna Kozlov is not the victim she pretends to be. She's been blackmailing my family for years. Thomas, I have Harrison's confession. I know about the trust fund he established for Michael Webster. Your father wanted to make this right. My father was a dying man being manipulated by a vindictive woman who wanted to destroy our family. That trust fund was created under duress, and any court will invalidate it if they understand the circumstances. Sarah looked at Anna, who was listening to the conversation with the expression of weary resignation. Mrs. Kozlov, is it true? Have you been blackmailing the Wellington family? Anna shook her head slowly. I never asked for money, Miss Chen. I only asked for acknowledgement of what Harrison had done and justice for David's son. Thomas offered me money to keep quiet, but I refused. That's when he began threatening me. Thomas's voice came through the phone clearly. Sarah, you have 5 minutes to walk away from this. Leave the old woman alone. Destroy whatever documents you think you found, and forget any of this ever happened. If you don't, I can't guarantee your safety or the safety of anyone else involved. Sarah looked around the peaceful visiting room at Sunset Manor, at Anna Kozlov's frail form and Elena's frightened face, and made the most important decision of her legal career. Thomas, I'm not walking away. I'm going to make sure Michael Webster gets what his father died for. And I'm going to make sure your father's confession reaches the public because that's what he wanted. She ended the call and turned to Anna and Elena. We need to get this information to Michael Webster and to the media before Thomas can stop us. Mrs. Kozlov, are you willing to go public with your story? Anna nodded with determination that belied her physical frailness. I have been waiting 30 years for this moment, Miss Chen. I am ready to tell the world what Harrison Wellington did to the man I loved. As they prepared to leave Sunset Manor, Sarah realized that the next few hours would determine whether justice or power would prevail in this decades-old conspiracy. Thomas Wellington had resources, connections, and the desperation of a man with everything to lose. But Sarah had the truth, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. The final battle for David Webster's legacy was about to begin, and Sarah intended to make sure that this time, the right side would win. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a television studio with Anna Kozlov, Michael Webster, who had flown in from Portland, and a team of investigative journalists who specialized in exposing corporate corruption. The trust fund documents, Harrison's confession, and David's original patent applications were spread across the table like evidence in a murder trial. Michael Webster looked exactly like his father in the old photographs. The same intelligent eyes,
the same determined jawline. When he spoke about learning the truth about his father's invention, his voice carried 3 decades of wondering and pain.
I always knew my father was working on something important before he died, Michael said to the cameras. My mother told me he had big plans for when he came home from Vietnam, but I never imagined that someone had stolen his ideas and built an empire with them. Anna Kozlov's interview was powerful in its quiet dignity. She spoke about David Webster as a brilliant young man who had wanted to use his invention to build a better future for his family. She explained how she had spent 30 years gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The story broke on the evening news and immediately went viral on social media. Within hours, other media outlets were picking up the story, and legal experts were analyzing the implications of Harrison's confession and the trust fund he had established. Thomas Wellington's response came swiftly. His lawyers filed injunctions trying to block the media coverage, claiming that the documents were forgeries and that Anna Kozlov was a mentally unstable woman pursuing a vendetta. But the evidence was too strong and too well documented to be dismissed. 3 days later, Michael Webster was officially recognized as the beneficiary of Harrison Wellington's trust fund. The legal settlement also included royalties from David's patent and a formal acknowledgement from the Wellington family that their fortune had been built on stolen intellectual property. Victoria Wellington issued a public statement taking responsibility for her father's actions and announcing that the family would be establishing a scholarship fund in David Webster's name for veterans pursuing careers in engineering and technology. Thomas Wellington disappeared from public view immediately after the story broke. Some reports suggested he had fled to a country without extradition treaties, facing potential criminal charges for his attempts to intimidate witnesses and suppress evidence. Sarah stood in her office a week later, looking out at Central Park and thinking about the strange journey that had led her from a routine estate case to one of the biggest corporate scandals of the year. Her phone rang, and she was surprised to hear Anna Kozlov's voice. Ms. Chen, I wanted to thank you for helping me keep my promise to David. His son will never want for anything, and the world knows that David Webster was a brilliant inventor who died serving his country. Mrs. Kozlov, what will you do now that this is all over? Anna's voice was peaceful for the first time since Sarah had known her. I think I will finally be able to rest, knowing that justice has been done. David can rest in peace now, too. As Sarah ended the call, she realized that this case had taught her something important about the nature of justice. Sometimes the truth takes decades to emerge, but when it finally does, it has the power to heal wounds that seemed impossible to close. Harrison Wellington had died carrying the weight of his betrayal, but his final confession had allowed his family to begin the process of redemption. Anna Kozlov had spent 30 years seeking justice for the man she loved, and she had finally found the peace that had eluded her for so long. And Michael Webster, the son of a fallen soldier, finally knew that his father's sacrifice and brilliance had not been forgotten or stolen. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged by the world. The Wellington fortune would be forever changed, but sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's the truth about who we really are and what we owe to those who came before us. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.